There are some secrets that change the shape of your entire life, that press down on your chest every morning when you wake up and whisper to you every night before you sleep. I'm 55 years old now, and I've been carrying one of those secrets for 21 years, 3 months and 17 days. Last night, that secret walked up to my cabin door and knocked 3 times, slow and deliberate, and when I opened it, I saw my sister Emily standing there in the moonlight, wearing the same red jacket she disappeared in back in 2003, looking exactly as she did when she was 23 years old. I'm telling you this now because I don't have a choice anymore. Because whatever agreement I made with the thing in those woods, silent and unspoken as it was, seems to have reached some kind of conclusion. Because Emily is sitting in my living room right now, drinking coffee I made her an hour ago, and she doesn't remember a single day of the last 21 years. And because the truth, as impossible as it sounds, needs to finally be spoken out loud. My name is John Mercer, and I live in a cabin 12 miles outside of Marquette, Michigan, deep in the superior upland forest where the pine trees grow so thick that sunlight only touches the ground in small, scattered patches. I've lived here alone since 2005, 2 years after Emily vanished, 2 years after our parents died from what the doctors called broken hearts, but what I knew was simply the slow death that comes from losing a child and never knowing why. I chose this place specifically. I chose it because it's close to where it happened, close to where I first saw the Wendigo. I need you to understand something before I go any further. I'm not a crazy person. I spent 30 years as a civil engineer. I designed bridges and water treatment facilities. I believe in mathematics, in load-bearing calculations, in the measurable and the provable. Everything I'm about to tell you goes against every rational bone in my body, and yet I saw it. I lived it. I've been living with it for more than 2 decades, and last night proved that I wasn't imagining any of it. It started in January of 2003. Emily had just finished her master's degree in environmental science and wanted to celebrate by doing what we'd done since we were kids: winter camping in the Up. Just the 2 of us, like old times, before life got too complicated. She was always the adventurous one, always pushing us deeper into the wilderness, away from the marked trails and the tourist spots. I was 34 then, already cautious, already sensing that the world held more dangers than I wanted to acknowledge. But she was my little sister, and when she looked at me with those bright green eyes and said, "Come on, Johnny, one more adventure," I couldn't say no. We drove up on a Thursday in mid-January, when the snow was deep and the temperature was hovering around 15 degrees. We parked at the end of a Forest Service road and hiked in about 8 miles to a spot Emily had marked on her topo map, a small clearing near the Huron River where she said the ice formations would be spectacular. She was right. The river had frozen in layers, creating these crystalline sculptures that caught the late afternoon sun and threw rainbows across the snow. We set up our tent, built a fire, and spent that first night talking about everything and nothing the way siblings do when they're alone in the wilderness with no one else for miles. The second day, we decided to explore further upstream. Emily wanted to photograph the ice caves she'd read about in some obscure hiking forum. The morning was clear and brutally cold, the kind of cold that makes your lungs hurt when you breathe. We followed the river for maybe 3 miles, moving slowly in our snowshoes, and that's when Emily stopped suddenly and grabbed my arm. "Do you hear that?" she whispered. I stopped and listened. At first, I heard nothing but the wind moving through the pines and the distant sound of ice cracking somewhere on the river. Then I heard it, a sound like breathing, deep and rhythmic, coming from somewhere in the trees to our left. But it wasn't quite breathing. It was something else, something that made the hair on the back of my neck stand up. "Probably just the wind," I said, but I didn't believe it. Emily didn't believe it either. I could see it in her face, the way her expression had changed from curiosity to something else. Not quite fear, but recognition. Like some ancient part of her brain had identified a threat that her conscious mind couldn't quite process yet. We stood there for what felt like hours but was probably only 30 seconds, and then the sound stopped. The forest went completely silent. No wind, no birds, no cracking ice. Just silence so complete it felt like pressure against my eardrums. "We should go back," I said. For once, Emily agreed. We made it back to camp around 3 in the afternoon. Neither of us mentioned what we'd heard, but we both knew something had changed. The forest felt different now, felt like it was watching us. We kept the fire big that night, bigger than necessary, and we barely slept. Every sound outside the tent made us stiffen, made us hold our breath and listen. Around 2 in the morning, I heard footsteps in the snow outside. Not the four-legged padding of a deer or bear, but two-legged steps, heavy and deliberate, circling our tent. I reached over and found Emily's hand in the darkness. She was already awake, already hearing it too. The footsteps stopped right outside the tent door. We could hear breathing again, that same strange sound from earlier, and then something else, a low sound that might have been a growl or might have been words in a language I'd never heard. Emily squeezed my hand so hard I thought she might break my fingers. Then, silence again. The presence moved away, and we heard it walking back into the forest, the sound of its steps fading until there was nothing. "We're leaving at first light," I whispered. "Agreed," Emily said, her voice shaking. But we didn't leave at first light. Because when dawn came and I unzipped the tent to survey the campsite, Emily wasn't beside me anymore. She was standing 30 feet away at the edge of the clearing, her back to me, perfectly still in her red jacket and snow pants, staring into the trees. I called out, climbing out of the tent. "What are you doing?" She didn't answer. Didn't turn around. I walked toward her, my heart starting to pound, and that's when I saw it. Standing in the shadows between the pines, maybe 50 feet from where Emily stood, was something that shouldn't exist. It was tall, impossibly tall, at least 8 feet, and thin in a way that seemed wrong, like its proportions violated some fundamental law of anatomy. Its skin, what I could see of it, was grayish-white, stretched tight over bones that jutted at odd angles. But it was the eyes that I'll never forget. Large and dark and intelligent, fixed on Emily with an intensity that made my stomach turn. I opened my mouth to scream, to grab my sister, to do something, but before I could move, the creature stepped forward and Emily stepped toward it. Like she was being pulled by an invisible thread. Like she had no choice. "Emily!" I finally shouted, running toward her. That's when it looked at me. Those dark eyes shifted from my sister to me, and I felt something inside my head. Not words exactly, but a presence, a knowing. And then it turned and moved back into the trees with a speed that shouldn't have been possible, and Emily followed. I ran after them. I ran until my lungs were burning and my legs were shaking, following the tracks in the snow, calling her name over and over. But they moved too fast, impossibly fast, and soon the tracks vanished where the snow thinned under the dense canopy, and I was alone in the forest with no idea which direction they'd gone. I searched for 6 hours before I had to return to camp to radio for help. The search and rescue teams came. They searched for 3 weeks. They found nothing. Emily Mercer, 23 years old, environmental science graduate, experienced outdoorswoman, had vanished without a trace in the winter forests of Michigan's Upper Peninsula. And I couldn't tell anyone what I'd seen. Because who would believe me? Who would believe that my sister had walked voluntarily into the woods following a creature that shouldn't exist? They'd think I'd killed her. They'd think I was insane. So I kept silent, and the silence became my prison, and I've lived in that prison ever since. Until last night, when the Wendigo brought her back. The official investigation lasted 6 months. State police, FBI, search and rescue volunteers who came from 3 states, everyone looking for a young woman who had simply disappeared into thin air. They questioned me 17 times. The same questions, slightly different words, watching my face for inconsistencies, for signs of guilt. I told them the truth about everything except the one thing that mattered. Yes, we'd heard something in the woods. No, I didn't see anything. Yes, she'd been acting normally. No, we hadn't argued. Yes, I'd woken up and she was just gone. The lie detector test was the worst. Not because I was afraid of failing it, I'd told myself the story so many times by then that I almost believed it myself, but because sitting in that chair, electrodes attached to my skin, I had to actively suppress the memory of what I'd actually seen. I had to push down the image of that creature, those eyes, my sister walking toward it like she was in a trance. The technician said my results were inconclusive due to emotional distress, which I suppose was accurate enough. My parents aged 20 years in those 6 months. My father, who'd been a robust 62-year-old who still chopped his own firewood, became a ghost. My mother stopped eating, stopped sleeping, spent hours staring at photographs of Emily as a child. They begged me to remember something, anything, that might help find her. And every day, I looked into their desperate faces and kept my silence. They died within 3 months of each other in 2005. My father had a heart attack while sitting in Emily's old bedroom. My mother simply didn't wake up one morning 6 weeks later. The doctors used medical terms, but I knew the truth. They died because the not knowing had consumed them from the inside out. And I could have given them something. Not answers, maybe, but at least the truth of what I'd witnessed. Instead, I let them die with questions. That guilt is its own kind of death. It's a weight that never lightens, a voice that never stops whispering. I moved to this cabin in late 2005, ostensibly to heal and process, but really because I needed to be close to where it happened. I needed to be in these woods, near that creature, because some irrational part of me believed that if I stayed close enough, I might see Emily again, might understand what had happened to her. For the first year, nothing happened. I hiked the same trails we'd taken. I camped in the same clearing. I called out her name in the darkness, feeling foolish and desperate. The forest remained silent, keeping its secrets. I began to think that maybe I had been insane that day, that grief and hypothermia and fear had created some kind of hallucination that my traumatized brain had mistaken for reality. Then, in January of 2007, exactly 4 years after Emily disappeared, I saw it again. I was splitting wood behind the cabin on a gray afternoon when I felt that presence again. The same feeling from that morning in 2003, like the air pressure had changed, like something was watching me. I turned slowly, axe still in my hands, and there it was, standing at the edge of the tree line about 100 feet away. In the daylight, it was even more impossible than I remembered. Its limbs were too long, its joints bent at angles that made my eyes hurt to look at. The skin was that same grayish white, and I could see now that it was covered in a fine layer of frost or maybe fur, something that caught the weak winter light and made it shimmer. But it was the eyes that held me frozen, dark and deep and aware, looking at me with what I can only describe as recognition. We stared at each other for maybe 3 minutes. My heart was pounding so hard I could hear it in my ears, but I wasn't afraid. Not the way I'd been afraid that morning 4 years ago. This felt different. This felt like an introduction, like the creature was allowing me to see it, to really see it for the first time. Then it did something that changed everything. It raised one impossibly long arm and pointed toward the north, toward the deeper woods, and then it turned and walked away, its movements fluid despite its strange proportions, and I knew it wanted me to follow. I grabbed my winter gear and followed it into the forest. It stayed ahead of me, always visible but never close, moving through the trees with an ease that I couldn't match even with my snowshoes. We walked for over an hour, deeper into the wilderness than I'd ever been, until we reached a place where the trees grew so dense that almost no snow had reached the ground. The creature stopped and turned to face me. We were maybe 20 feet apart, close enough that I could see the texture of its skin, the way its chest rose and fell with breath, close enough that when it made that sound again, that low, almost language sound, I could feel it in my bones. And then I saw them. Items arranged carefully on a flat rock. Emily's camera, the expensive digital one she'd brought on the trip. Her compass. Her knife. The little silver bracelet our grandmother had given her when she turned 16. All of them laid out like offerings, like evidence, like proof. I fell to my knees in the snow. "Where is she?" I asked, my voice breaking. "What did you do with her?" The Wendigo, because that's what I'd started calling it in my mind, that word from Ojibwe stories, that creature of hunger and winter, tilted its head, and I felt that presence again in my thoughts. Not words, but something else. Images, maybe. Impressions. Emily alive. Emily safe. Emily somewhere else. Somewhere I couldn't follow. Is she? I couldn't finish the question. The creature made a sound that might have been affirmative. Then it reached down with one elongated hand and touched the bracelet, pushed it slightly toward me. An offering. A message. A promise, maybe, or a confession. I took the bracelet. The metal was ice cold against my palm. "Can I see her?" I whispered. The Wendigo was silent for a long moment, and then it shook its head, a strangely human gesture from something so inhuman. It turned and began to walk away, but before it disappeared into the trees, it looked back at me one more time, and I understood. This was the beginning of something. An acknowledgement. A relationship that neither of us had asked for, but that existed nonetheless. Over the next 18 years, I saw the Wendigo 73 times. I kept a journal, marking each encounter, trying to find patterns. Sometimes months would pass with nothing. Other times, I'd see it 3 times in a single week. It never approached closer than 15 feet. It never tried to harm me. But it was always aware of me, always watching. I began to learn its patterns. It stayed in the deepest parts of the forest, away from hiking trails and hunting camps. It moved with the seasons, following some instinct or need I couldn't understand. In winter, it ranged closer to my cabin. In summer, it retreated to the northern reaches where humans rarely traveled. And slowly, impossibly, I began to protect it. When hunters mentioned seeing something strange in the woods, I steered them away. When a group of cryptozoology enthusiasts came to the area in 2012, tracking reports of a Michigan devil, I sent them in the wrong direction. When the Forestry Service wanted to put in new trails near what I'd started thinking of as its territory, I filed environmental objections until they gave up. I became its guardian without ever making a conscious decision to do so. Because it had Emily somehow, somewhere. Because it had shown me mercy when it could have killed me. Because in some strange way, over all those years of silent encounters in the forest, we had come to understand each other. My friends, the few I had left, thought I'd become a hermit. They worried about me, tried to draw me back to civilization, to normalcy. But how could I explain that I couldn't leave? That I was bound to these woods by something stronger than reason, by a promise I'd never spoken and a secret I could never share? Last night, that bond finally brought Emily home. But I'm getting ahead of myself. There's more you need to understand about those 18 years, about what I learned, about what I became. Because the truth is, I wasn't just protecting the Wendigo. I was protecting what it represented, the impossibility, the mystery, the thin place where the world as we know it meets something older and stranger and more terrible than we can imagine. And maybe, deep down, I was protecting myself. Because as long as the Wendigo existed, as long as I could see it in those woods, there was still a chance that Emily was really alive somewhere, kept safe by something I couldn't understand. A chance that one day she might come back. Last night she did. People think silence is the absence of sound, but that's not true. Real silence is a presence, something that fills space and presses against you. That's what the forest became for me over those 18 years, a presence of silence, punctuated occasionally by moments of impossible truth. I learned things about the Wendigo that I couldn't have learned any other way. Not from books or legends, but from observation, from patience, from the slow accumulation of small encounters that built into something like knowledge. I learned that it didn't hunt like an animal. Never saw it take down deer or rabbits, though game was plentiful. I learned that it seemed most active during the deep cold, the months when the temperature dropped below zero and stayed there for weeks. I learned that it could move with impossible speed when it wanted to, but most of the time it moved slowly, deliberately, like it was considering each step. Most importantly, I learned that it was intelligent. Not animal intelligence, but something closer to human awareness. Maybe beyond human. There were times when I'd see it watching me from a distance, and I could feel it thinking, assessing, deciding things I couldn't understand. In the winter of 2009, I made a decision that changed our relationship. I started leaving food out. Not bait exactly, but offerings. Venison from the deer I hunted each fall. Fresh fish from the river. Sometimes just bread and salt, because some old instinct told me those things mattered. I'd leave them at the edge of my property line where the forest began, and I'd go back inside. In the morning, the food would be gone. No tracks, no signs, just gone. And over the following weeks, the Wendigo started appearing more frequently. Not closer, it maintained that 15-foot boundary like an invisible wall, but more often. Like it was checking on me. Like our unspoken agreement had deepened into something else. There was an incident in 2013 that I think about a lot. A group of trophy hunters from downstate came up in November, looking for a big buck one of them had seen on a trail camera. They set up camp about 3 miles from my cabin, right in the heart of what I thought of as the Wendigo's territory. I heard them before I saw them. Chainsaws cutting shooting lanes, ATVs tearing through the underbrush, the crack of rifle fire as they practiced on makeshift targets. I hiked out there to talk to them, to suggest maybe they'd be better off in a different area. Found 5 guys in their 40s, expensive gear, too much beer, the kind of hunters who are more interested in the kill than the hunt. They laughed at my concerns, made jokes about tree huggers and property rights, told me they had a permit and I could mind my own business. That night I couldn't sleep. Kept thinking about what might happen if they encountered the Wendigo. Would it attack them? Would they shoot it? Would the whole fragile secret I'd been guarding for a decade finally be exposed? I lay awake listening to the wind and trying to figure out if I should call the sheriff, though what I'd tell him I had no idea. Around 3 in the morning, I heard the ATVs start up. All of them at once, engines roaring, then men shouting. I grabbed my coat and flashlight and headed toward their camp, my heart hammering. When I got there, the camp was in chaos. Tents collapsed, gear scattered everywhere, and all 5 men crowded into one of their trucks with the engine running and the lights on. One of them, the loudest one from earlier, was borderline hysterical. "Did you see it?" he kept saying. "Did you fucking see that thing?" "What thing?" I asked. None of them could explain it clearly. Something tall. Something wrong. Something that had walked through their camp, stepping over their tents, looking down at them with eyes that reflected their flashlight beams like a predator's. They were packed and gone within 30 minutes, left half their gear behind in their panic. I waited until their trucks were gone, then I walked to the center of their abandoned camp. The Wendigo was standing there, barely visible in the darkness, watching me. We looked at each other for a long time, and I felt something from it. Not quite gratitude, but acknowledgement. It had driven them away, but it had done it without violence, without leaving evidence that would bring more hunters more attention. It had trusted that I would understand. "Thank you," I said out loud. It tilted its head, that strange almost human gesture, and then it was gone, moving back into the shadows like it had never been there at all. After that, our relationship shifted again. The Wendigo began to show me things. Places in the forest I'd never found on my own, a cave system that went deeper than any geological survey suggested, a grove of white pines that were easily 300 years old, trees that should have been logged generations ago but somehow weren't. Places where the world felt thin, where reality seemed less solid. In one of those places, a small clearing about 5 miles northeast of my cabin, I found more of Emily's things. Not just items, but a kind of shrine. Her hiking boots, arranged neatly. The red jacket she'd been wearing, folded carefully and placed on a flat stone. Her journal, the one she'd kept about forest ecology, every page intact. And photographs. Dozens of them, printed and placed in a pattern I couldn't decipher. Photos of our family, of places we'd visited as kids, of Emily herself at different ages. I sat in that clearing for hours, holding her journal, reading her handwriting, crying for the first time in years. The Wendigo watched from the tree line, silent and patient. When I finally stood to leave, I turned to it and asked the question I'd been asking for 10 years. "Is she alive?" It stepped closer than it ever had before, maybe 10 feet away. Close enough that I could smell it, something like pine and snow and something else, something wild and ancient. Close enough that when it made that low sound I could almost understand it. Almost. And then it did something it had never done before. It reached into the hollow of a tree and pulled out something wrapped in leather. Handed it to me. Actually handed it to me, our first physical interaction after all those years. Inside the leather was a lock of hair. Brown, shot through with hints of auburn. Emily's hair. I looked up at the creature, questions breaking like waves against my ability to speak. It touched its chest, then pointed at me, then gestured to the forest around us. And I understood. Emily was part of something now. Something bigger than I could comprehend. Something that involved the Wendigo, these woods, that thin place between what we know and what we can't explain. She wasn't dead. But she wasn't exactly alive the way we understand it either. I took the lock of hair home, put it in a small box on my mantel, looked at it every day for the next 8 years, trying to understand what it meant, what I was supposed to do with the knowledge that my sister existed somewhere in a state I couldn't define. The years passed. I turned 40, then 45, then 50. My hair went gray. My knees started aching in cold weather. I became the thing I'd never imagined, a solitary old man living alone in the woods, protecting a secret that grew heavier with each passing year. Friends stopped calling. The few family members I had left gave up on trying to include me in holidays. I was disappearing into these woods just as surely as Emily had, just slowly enough that no one noticed. But I kept watch, kept my silent agreement with the creature in the forest, kept hoping that somehow, someday, there would be an answer, a resolution, an end to the waiting. Last winter was brutal. Temperatures dropped to 30 below for 2 weeks straight. Snow so deep I could barely get the cabin door open. I spent most of January splitting wood and rationing food, wondering if I'd made a mistake staying out here as I got older, wondering what would happen when I finally couldn't take care of myself anymore. The Wendigo appeared more frequently during that cold snap. Sometimes I'd see it 3 times a day, just standing at the edge of the property, watching the cabin. I wondered if it was checking on me, if after all these years some kind of concern had developed. Or maybe it was just the cold. Maybe the deep freeze drew it closer to human habitation, to the warmth and light that its nature should have made it hate. On the worst night, when the temperature hit 38 below and my generator died and I was huddled by the wood stove trying not to freeze, I heard it outside the cabin. That breathing sound, that presence. Part of me wanted to open the door, to invite it in, to finally break the last barrier between us. But I didn't. Some boundaries exist for reasons we don't fully understand. In the morning, I found 3 cords of split wood stacked neatly by my door. Would that hadn't been there the night before? Would that had appeared silently while I slept, placed carefully to keep the snow off it? The Wendigo taking care of me the way I'd taken care of it for nearly 2 decades. That's when I knew something was changing. The relationship we'd built, strange and unspoken as it was, had reached some kind of culmination. After 18 years of watching, of waiting, of protecting each other from a distance, something was about to happen. I didn't know what, didn't know when, but I felt it like a pressure in my chest, like the air before a thunderstorm. 2 nights ago, that pressure broke. The Wendigo came to my door and knocked. And when I opened it, my sister was standing there, unchanged, looking exactly as she had the last time I saw her in 2003. But I'm getting ahead of myself again. There's one more thing you need to understand before I tell you about last night. One more piece of the story that explains why this is happening now, why after 21 years the Wendigo finally brought Emily back. Because 3 weeks ago, I got diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less. And somehow, I don't know how, can't explain it, the Wendigo knew. The first doctor's appointment was in early October. I'd been coughing for months, telling myself it was just the wood smoke, just the cold air, just age catching up with me. But when I started coughing up blood, even I couldn't ignore it anymore. I drove to Marquette, to the regional hospital where I hadn't been since my mother died 15 years ago. The oncologist was a kind woman in her 50s named Dr. Patterson. She showed me the CT scans, the dark masses blooming across my lungs like malignant flowers. Stage 4 adenocarcinoma. Metastatic. The words felt distant, like she was describing someone else's body, someone else's death. "You've never smoked?" she asked, puzzled. "Never," I confirmed. "Any exposure to asbestos, radon, industrial chemicals?" I shook my head. Just with smoke and clean air and 18 years of breathing the deep forest atmosphere. Sometimes cancer doesn't need a reason. Sometimes it just comes. She talked about treatment options, chemotherapy, immunotherapy, clinical trials. But the way she said it, the careful gentleness in her voice, told me what her words didn't. Too far advanced. Too aggressive. We could fight it, but we'd lose. The question was only how much time the fighting would buy me, and at what cost. If I don't treat it. I asked. 6 months, she said quietly. Maybe 8. Less if the tumors spread to your brain or liver, which they likely will. I thanked her, took the pamphlets and the prescriptions for pain management, drove back to the cabin through autumn woods that looked more beautiful than they had any right to, every leaf and every shaft of sunlight feeling precious now that I knew how few times I'd see them. I didn't tell anyone. Who was there to tell? I had no family left, no close friends, no one who would grieve for John Mercer when he finally disappeared into the same woods that had taken his sister. In a way, it felt appropriate, symmetrical, like I'd been living on borrowed time since 2003, and now the bill was finally coming due. But that night something strange happened. I was sitting on the porch watching the sunset, trying to process what I'd learned, when I felt it. That presence. Stronger than it had ever been before, so strong it was almost physical, like pressure against my skin. I looked toward the tree line and the Wendigo was there, closer than it had ever come. Maybe 10 feet from the porch, standing in the fading light. We looked at each other for a long time. Its eyes, those dark, intelligent eyes, held something I'd never seen before. Not just awareness, but something else. Sorrow, maybe. Understanding. Like it knew what the doctor had told me. Like it could sense death approaching the way animals sense earthquakes before they happen. I wanted to speak, to say something, but my throat was too tight. Instead, I just nodded at it. An acknowledgement. We'd both know this was coming eventually. I'm 55, and it had probably been watching humans for centuries. It understood mortality in ways I couldn't imagine. The Wendigo made that low sound, that almost language, and this time I swear I understood one word. Or maybe not a word, but a concept. Wait. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, and I sat there until full dark, wondering what I was waiting for. Over the next 3 weeks I saw it almost every day. Not just glimpses, but sustained encounters. It would appear in the morning while I was chopping wood, or in the evening while I was bringing water from the well. Never threatening, never approaching too close, but always there. Always watching with those eyes that seemed to hold centuries of knowing. My body started to fail in small ways. The coughing got worse. I began losing weight. Some mornings I woke up with pain that took my breath away, pain that the pills could only partially touch. I moved slower, tired faster, felt the cancer eating me from the inside out. But through it all, the Wendigo kept watch. And I started to understand that our relationship had always been leading to this moment. That somehow, across all those years, across the impossible gulf between human and whatever the Wendigo was, we'd been preparing for something. For an ending. Or maybe for something else. Then, 2 nights ago, everything changed. It was late, after midnight, maybe closer to 1 in the morning. I'd been asleep or trying to sleep, the pain in my chest making rest difficult. I was drifting in that space between waking and dreaming when I heard it. 3 knocks on my door. Slow, deliberate, evenly spaced. The kind of knock a person makes, not an animal. I got out of bed, grabbed the flashlight, wrapped a blanket around my shoulders against the cold. My heart was racing, though I didn't know why. Or maybe I did know. Maybe some part of me had been waiting for this knock for 21 years. I opened the door. The Wendigo was standing on my porch. Closer than it had ever been, maybe 6 feet away, its impossible height forcing it to stoop slightly under the porch roof. In the moonlight, I could see it clearly for the first time. The texture of its skin like birch bark, the strange angles of its joints, the way its breath created clouds of vapor in the cold air. But it wasn't alone. Standing beside it, looking confused and frightened and exactly as young as she had been in 2003, was Emily, my sister, wearing the same red jacket, the same jeans and hiking boots, her hair in the same braid, looking not a day older than 23, though she should have been 44 now. Should have had gray hair, maybe. Laugh lines around her eyes. The weight of 2 decades written on her face. Instead, she looked at me with those same bright green eyes, and I saw no recognition there. No memory. No understanding of who I was or what was happening. Emily. My voice came out as a whisper. She took a step back closer to the Wendigo, and it placed one impossibly long hand on her shoulder. Not restraining but comforting. Protective. I looked from my sister to the creature and back again, my mind trying to process what I was seeing, trying to make it fit into some framework that made sense. The Wendigo met my eyes, and I felt that presence in my head again, stronger than it had ever been. Not words, but meaning. Understanding flowing between us like current in a river. It was giving her back. After 21 years, after decades of silence and watching and waiting, the Wendigo was returning Emily to me. Because I was dying. Because whatever purpose or need or strange compact had kept her all this time was finished. Because even creatures that shouldn't exist understand that humans need to say goodbye. She doesn't remember, I said. Not a question. The Wendigo made that low sound, and I felt the confirmation. Whatever she'd been for the last 21 years, wherever she'd existed, whatever she'd experienced, she didn't remember it. For her, no time had passed. She'd walked into the woods following the Wendigo on a January morning in 2003, and now she was here, and in her mind only moments had elapsed. Emily was shivering, looking between me and the creature with growing fear. "Who are you?" she asked me. "What's happening? Where's Johnny?" I felt something break inside my chest that had nothing to do with the cancer. She was looking for me, for the Johnny she remembered, the 34-year-old brother who'd taken her camping. Not this gray-haired, cancer-sick old man standing in front of her. "I'm John," I said gently. "I'm your brother. You've been gone a long time, Em. A very long time." Her face went white. She looked at the Wendigo, then back at me, and I could see her trying to process it, trying to make the impossible math work. "That's not. You can't be. Johnny's young. He's 34. You're 55, I finished. "It's 2024, Emily. You disappeared in 2003, 21 years ago." I watched her face as the words sank in. Watched the confusion become disbelief, become a kind of horror. She looked down at her hands, touched her face, as if checking to make sure she was real. "That's impossible. That's insane. We were just camping and then She trailed off, her eyes going to the Wendigo. It stood perfectly still, watching her with those dark eyes, and I saw something pass between them. Some understanding, some connection that I wasn't part of. Emily's expression changed, the fear receding slightly, replaced by something else. Wonder, maybe. Or recognition. "You," she whispered to the creature. "I remember you. Not all of it, but pieces. Dreams, maybe. Or memories that feel like dreams." She turned back to me, tears starting to stream down her face. "Mom and Dad. Where are they? They must be so worried. We need to call them, we need to." "They're gone, Em," I said as gently as I could. "They died in 2005. The not knowing it killed them." She made a sound like an animal in pain. Her knees buckled, and I moved forward to catch her, but the Wendigo was faster. It lowered her carefully to the porch, that strange hand still on her shoulder, still offering what comfort it could. And I stood there, watching my sister learn that she'd lost 21 years, that our parents had died thinking she was dead, that the world had moved on without her while she existed somewhere outside of time. The Wendigo looked at me, and I felt its thought as clearly as if it had spoken. "This is your time. What happens now is between you and her. My part is finished." It stepped back from Emily, that strange fluid motion, and began to walk away. But I called out to it, called out to the creature that had haunted and protected me for 18 years, that had kept my sister safe in whatever impossible way it had, that was now giving her back because it knew I was dying. "Thank you," I said. It stopped at the edge of the porch, turned to look at me one last time. And I felt something from it. Not quite affection, not quite friendship, but something close. Recognition of the bond we'd built across all those years, across the impossible gulf between human and other. A bond built on trust and silence and mutual protection. Then it was gone, melting into the darkness, and I was alone with my sister who didn't remember the last 2 decades, who still thought our parents were alive, who had no idea that her older brother was dying. I helped Emily inside, made her tea, wrapped her in blankets, and slowly, carefully, I began to tell her everything. Have you ever had to explain the impossible to someone you love? To watch their face as you shatter their reality piece by piece, fact by fact, until nothing they thought they knew makes sense anymore? That's what that first night was like. Sitting at my kitchen table with Emily, watching her try to comprehend that she'd lost 21 years of her life, that everyone she knew was older or dead, that the world she'd left behind in 2003 had transformed into something she didn't recognize. She cried. God, she cried. Deep, wrenching sobs that shook her whole body. Cried for our parents, for the lost years, for the life she was supposed to have lived. I held her the way I used to when she was little, when she'd fall and scrape her knee or have a nightmare. But this wasn't something I could fix with a Band-Aid and a story. This was grief on a scale that had no comfort. Around 4 a.m, when the crying had finally subsided into exhausted silence, she looked at me with red-rimmed eyes and asked the question I'd been dreading. What happened to me, Johnny? Where was I? I'd spent 21 years wondering the same thing. I don't know, I admitted. I've seen that creature, the Wendigo, hundreds of times over the years. Followed it, watched it, tried to understand it. But I never found where it took you. Never understood what happened after you walked into those trees. Emily stared at her tea, watching the steam rise. I remember pieces. Not like regular memories. More like impressions. Like trying to remember a dream after you've woken up. I remember cold. Not painful cold, just constant. And darkness, but not frightening darkness. Safe darkness. She paused, struggling to find words for experiences that language wasn't designed to describe. And time felt different. Like it didn't pass the way it should. Like I was sleeping but also awake. Does that make any sense? No, I said honestly. But nothing about this makes sense. She looked up at me then, really looked at me, seeing the gray in my hair, the lines around my eyes, the way age had changed her big brother into someone she barely recognized. You stayed, she said quietly. All these years you stayed here. Near where it happened. I had to. I saw it take you. I couldn't tell anyone, couldn't explain, but I couldn't leave either. I thought. I don't know what I thought. That maybe if I stayed close enough, you'd come back. Or I'd understand. Or something. You wasted your whole life waiting for me. The accusation in her voice stung, even though she was right. It wasn't wasted. I made a choice. Maybe not a good choice, but it was mine. Emily stood up, walked to the window, looked out at the forest that was just beginning to show the first hints of dawn. I remember it watching me. Not in a creepy way, more like it was curious. Interested. Like I was something it hadn't encountered before. She turned back to me. I wasn't afraid. That's the strangest part. I should have been terrified, but I wasn't. It felt like being chosen for something. Like I was special. I thought about that word. Special. About how the Wendigo had selected Emily out of all the people in these woods, all the hikers and hunters and campers. Why her? What had it seen in my 23-year-old sister that made it take her? And why return her now unchanged after 21 years? The creature, the Wendigo, it's been watching over you, I said. All this time. It left me your things over the years. Your camera, your bracelet, your journal. Like it was keeping them safe for you. Like it knew someday you'd need them back. Do you have them? Can I see them? I brought her the box where I'd kept everything. Watched her go through her possessions with shaking hands, touching each item like an artifact from an archaeological dig. Her own life, preserved and returned. When she found her journal, she opened it to a random page and read her own handwriting from 2 decades ago. Notes about old-growth forest ecosystems, sketches of leaf patterns, a pressed flower tucked between pages. I was so young, she whispered. I knew so much less than I thought I did. Had so many plans. Graduate school, research positions, maybe teaching someday. I was going to save forests, protect wilderness areas. I had my whole life mapped out. You still have a life, I said. It's not the one you planned, but you have one. She looked at me with something like anger. Do I? I'm 23 years old in a world that's moved on without me. I have no education credentials that anyone will recognize. My graduate degree is from 2003. I have no work experience, no social media presence, no digital footprint. I'm a ghost, Johnny. I'm not even supposed to exist. She wasn't wrong. How do you explain to the Social Security Administration that someone who's been legally dead for 20 years just walked out of the woods unchanged? How do you prove identity when you haven't aged? The practical problems alone were overwhelming. Never mind the psychological ones. We'll figure it out, I said, though I had no idea how. One step at a time. First, you need rest. Real rest, not whatever suspended state you were in. Take my bed, I'll sleep on the couch. I'm not tired, she said, but her eyes were hollow with exhaustion. I don't think I can sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. The Wendigo. And I feel like I'm back there, in that place where time doesn't work right, and I'm afraid I won't wake up again. Or that I'll wake up and another 20 years will have passed. I understood that fear intimately. I'll stay up with you then. We can watch the sunrise. You haven't seen a sunrise in a long time. Not really. So we sat together on the porch as the sky slowly lightened from black to gray to that deep blue that comes just before dawn. The forest around us came alive with morning sounds. Birds starting their songs, wind moving through the pines, the distant sound of ice on the river shifting and groaning. Emily wrapped in blankets, me in my heavy coat, both of us watching the world wake up. It's beautiful, she said softly. I'd forgotten how beautiful it is. You weren't exactly forgetting, I pointed out. For you, it's only been hours since you saw a morning. But I had forgotten, she insisted. In that place, wherever I was, beauty didn't exist. Nothing existed except being. No color, no sound, no sensation. Just being. Like I was a thought that something was thinking, not a person anymore. The way she described it made my skin crawl. What had the Wendigo done to her? Where had she existed for 21 years if not in any physical place? And how had it kept her preserved, unchanging, while the rest of the world aged and moved on? Are you going to tell me what I saw? I asked finally. Back in 2003, when you walked toward it. Did you see something? Did it communicate with you? Emily was quiet for a long time. When she finally spoke, her voice was distant, like she was describing something that had happened to someone else. I heard it calling me. Not with sound, with something else. Like it was pulling on a string that was attached directly to my soul. I couldn't not follow it. It wasn't mind control exactly. I knew what I was doing, knew I was making a choice. But the choice felt inevitable. Like everything in my life had been leading to that moment, and saying no wasn't really an option. And then I was somewhere else. Not walking there, just suddenly there. In a place that was dark but not dark, cold but not cold. And the Wendigo was there with me, and it was different. Bigger somehow, or maybe I was smaller. And it touched me. She shuddered at the memory. And everything just stopped. Time, thought, fear. Everything. And I slept. For what felt like minutes but was apparently 21 years. I tried to imagine it and couldn't. A space outside of space. Time that didn't pass. My sister, preserved like a butterfly in amber, while the world spun on without her. Why? I asked. Why did it take you? What did it want? I don't know. But I felt something from it in that last moment before I went to sleep. Not words, just emotion. Loneliness. Like it had been alone for a very, very long time, and it wanted something to keep. Someone who wouldn't age and die the way humans do. A companion, maybe. Or a possession. I'm not sure there's a difference to something like that. The sun broke over the horizon, turning the sky gold and pink. Emily lifted her face to the light, and I saw tears tracking down her cheeks again. I lost everything, she whispered. Mom, Dad, my career, my friends. 21 years of life. And I can't even be angry about it because I don't remember most of it. It's like mourning a dream. I wanted to tell her it would be okay, that she'd adjust, that life would return to normal. But I'd be lying, and we both knew it. Nothing would ever be normal again. She was a woman out of time, and I was a man running out of it. We were both standing on the edge of something vast and unknowable, trying to find solid ground. "There's something else I need to tell you," I said quietly. "About why the Wendigo brought you back now." She looked at me, and in her eyes I saw that she already knew. The way I moved, the way I looked, the pain I tried to hide but couldn't completely. "You're sick," she said. Not a question. "Lung cancer. Stage 4. The doctors give me 6 months, maybe less." Her face crumpled. No, Johnny, that's not fair. I just got back, I just found you again, we can't. You can't." "I know," I said, pulling her close. "I know it's not fair. None of this is fair. But it's what we have. And maybe that's why the Wendigo brought you back now. It knew I was dying. It knew we needed time to say goodbye. To have this, whatever this is, before the end." Emily cried into my shoulder, and I held her while the sun continued to rise, burning away the morning mist. Somewhere in the forest I felt that presence again. The Wendigo watching from a distance, bearing witness to what it had created, this impossible reunion, this gift wrapped in tragedy. I looked toward where I felt it, toward the deep forest where it lived its ancient, unknowable life. And I understood finally what the last 18 years had been building toward. Not just protection, not just mutual watching, but preparation. The Wendigo had been preparing me to receive Emily back, teaching me patience, teaching me acceptance of the impossible, building trust so that when this moment came, I'd be ready. And maybe it had been preparing Emily too, in that space outside of time, keeping her safe, keeping her unchanged, until the moment when her brother needed her most, until the moment when dying alone would have been too much to bear. It was a gift, strange and terrible and costly, but a gift nonetheless. Time to say goodbye. Time to help my sister find her way in a world that had forgotten her. Time to make peace with the choices I'd made and the life I'd lived in the shadow of the forest. The sun rose higher, and Emily and I sat together, and the morning that had seemed impossible just hours ago settled into something like reality. We had work to do, questions to answer, a life to rebuild, and a death to prepare for. But for that moment, we just sat together, brother and sister, reunited by a creature that shouldn't exist, granted time we had no right to expect. In the forest, something moved. A shadow darker than the others, tall and thin and watching. Always watching. The Wendigo, guardian of impossible things, keeper of secrets older than memory. I raised my hand in acknowledgement. "Thank you," I thought, not sure if it could hear me, but saying it anyway. "Thank you for bringing her back. Thank you for the years of watching. Thank you for understanding." The shadow shifted, and I felt something like farewell. Its work was finished. The agreement fulfilled. What happened now was up to Emily and me. Then it was gone, melting back into the deep forest, and I knew I'd never see it again. Our time together had ended. The strange bond we'd forged was complete. I had 6 months to help my sister find her way back to the world. 6 months to tell her everything I knew about the Wendigo, about what had happened, about the choices I'd made. 6 months to give her the closure our parents had never gotten. It wasn't enough time. But it was more than I'd had any right to expect. And in the end, that's all any of us can hope for. A little more time than we expected, and someone to share it with. The first few days after Emily's return were surreal in ways I hadn't anticipated. It wasn't just helping her adjust to 2 decades of technological change or explaining world events she'd missed. It was smaller things. The way she looked in the mirror and expected to see a 44-year-old woman but found a 23-year-old staring back. The way she automatically reached for a flip phone instead of the smartphone I tried to give her. The way she'd reference something from 2003 as if it happened yesterday, because for her, it had. She cried a lot those first days. Grieved for our parents, for her lost years, for the person she was supposed to become. But she also asked questions. Hundreds of them. About the world, about me, about what I'd been doing all these years. And slowly I told her everything. I showed her the journals I'd kept, documenting every encounter with the Wendigo. 73 sightings over 18 years, each one noted with date, time, location, weather conditions. She read through them with a kind of fascinated horror, seeing the obsession that had defined my life after she disappeared. "You really did stay," she said, looking up from a journal entry about the winter of 2009. "All those years just waiting and watching. What else could I do? Everyone thought you were dead. The investigation closed. But I knew you weren't dead. I knew that thing had you somewhere, somehow. Leaving felt like abandoning you." She was quiet for a moment. "And you never told anyone? Never tried to explain what you saw?" "Who would believe me? They'd think I'd killed you and made up an insane story to cover it. Or they'd think I was having a psychotic break. Either way, I'd have ended up in prison or a psychiatric hospital. And even if someone did believe me, what then? They'd hunt it, try to capture it or kill it. And I couldn't let that happen." "Why not?" The question wasn't accusatory, just curious. "It took me, Johnny. It stole 21 years of my life. Why protect it?" I thought about how to answer that. "Because it didn't hurt you. Whatever it did, however it kept you, you came back whole, unchanged. And because over the years, I came to understand that it wasn't evil. Just different. Operating by rules we don't understand, with needs that don't align with ours. It took you, yes. But it also kept you safe. Brought you back when it knew I needed you. That has to mean something." Emily looked out the window toward the forest. "I've been thinking about what I remember. Those fragments. And I don't think it took me randomly. I think it chose me specifically. I was studying forest ecology, talking about how we need to understand and protect these wild spaces. Maybe it heard that in whatever way it hears things. Maybe it wanted to show me something." "What do you mean?" "In that place, that non-place where I wasn't really conscious most of the time. But there were moments of awareness, like surfacing from deep water for a few seconds before going back under. And in those moments I saw things, felt things. The forest, but not just this forest. All forests everywhere connected like a nervous system. And old things living in those forests, watching humanity spread and change and consume. The Wendigo wasn't alone, Johnny. It was just the one we encountered. The implications of that made my head spin. You're saying there are more of them? Or things like them? Things that exist in the margins, in the wild places we haven't fully mapped and catalogued. Things that have learned to hide from us, to avoid us, to survive in the cracks between what we know and what we don't." She turned back to me. "I think the Wendigo took me because it wanted me to understand, to carry that knowledge back somehow. Maybe it knew I'd eventually return. Maybe that was always the plan. But you don't remember most of it." "No. But I remember the feeling. The vastness. The age. The intelligence. It's not a monster, Johnny. It's something older and stranger than that. And it's alone now, or nearly alone, in a world that doesn't have space for things like it anymore." We sat with that thought for a while. Outside, the November wind moved through the pines, making them sway and whisper. I thought about the Wendigo out there somewhere, ancient and solitary, watching the forest shrink and fragment around it, watching humanity encroach year by year, knowing that eventually there would be nowhere left to hide. "It gave me back to you," Emily said quietly, "because you protected it. All those years you kept it secret, steered people away, guarded its territory. It was paying a debt." "Maybe," I said. "Or maybe it just understood that you belonged here with your family, even if it had to wait 21 years to return you." That night, Emily slept in a real bed for the first time in what felt like forever to her. I heard her crying softly around midnight, and I almost went to comfort her, but I thought better of it. Some grief needs to be private. Some mourning needs to happen alone. I spent the night on the couch, coughing more than sleeping, feeling the cancer eating away at my lungs. The pain was worse lately. I'd been rationing the medication, trying to make it last, but I knew I'd need to go back to the doctor soon for something stronger. The question was whether I told Emily about how bad it really was, or whether I tried to hide it for as long as I could. In the morning, she made that decision for me. Came out of the bedroom and saw me doubled over, coughing blood into the kitchen sink. Saw the way I had to brace myself against the counter, the way it took me 5 minutes to get my breath back. "How long has it been this bad?" she asked quietly. "A few weeks. It's progressing faster than they expected." She didn't say anything, just helped me to a chair and got me water. Then she sat down across from me, and I saw something in her face that reminded me of our mother. That fierce determination, that refusal to accept defeat. "We're going to fight this," she said. "I didn't come back just to watch you die. The cancer is stage 4. There's nothing to fight. It's just about managing the pain until—" "No." Her voice was hard. "I've lost 21 years, Johnny. I've lost Mom and Dad and every plan I ever made for my life. I am not losing you too. Not without trying everything. There's nothing to try. The doctors were clear." "Western doctors," she interrupted, "who understand Western medicine. But I've been somewhere else, Johnny. I've seen things, felt things, that those doctors don't even believe exist. Maybe there's another way." I stared at her. "What are you suggesting?" "I'm suggesting that if the Wendigo could keep me alive and unchanged for 21 years, maybe it, or something like it, could help you. Maybe there's knowledge in these woods that we've forgotten. Old knowledge. The kind that indigenous peoples used for millennia before we decided we knew better." It was a desperate idea, probably a foolish one. But I could see in her eyes that she needed this. Needed to feel like she could do something, could save something after having so much taken from her. "Okay," I said. "We'll try. But I'm not getting my hopes up, and neither should you." Over the next week, Emily threw herself into research with the same intensity she'd once applied to her graduate studies. She drove to the university library in Marquette, dug through archives of indigenous oral histories, tracked down members of the local Ojibwe community who were willing to talk to her. She asked about the Wendigo, about forest spirits, about traditional medicines and healing practices. Most people she talked to were skeptical or dismissed her outright. The Wendigo in most Ojibwe tradition was a malevolent spirit, a creature of hunger and winter madness, not something that kept people safe or offered healing. But one elder, an old man named Michael Nokemes who lived on the reservation near Baraga, listened to her story with surprising openness. "The Wendigo you're describing isn't the one from the stories," he told her. "The stories are warnings, meant to teach us about the dangers of isolation and greed and letting hunger control you. But the old ones, they also talked about other beings. Manitous, spirits of the land itself. Some were dangerous, yes. But some were just ancient. Just different. Just trying to survive as the world changed around them." "Do you think one of these beings could help my brother?" Emily asked. Michael was quiet for a long time. "I think your brother was given a gift, the chance to say goodbye, to have time with you that he thought he'd never have. That's not nothing. But if you're asking whether the forest holds healing that modern medicine doesn't understand, then yes. Of course it does. The question is whether that healing is meant for him, or whether his path is already set." Emily came home from that meeting with a bag of herbs, cedar, sage, tobacco, and instructions for ceremonies that Michael had shared with her. For the next several weeks, she performed them faithfully. Burned sage in the cabin every morning. Made tea from cedar and other plants she gathered in the forest. Asked me to sit with her while she offered tobacco to the forest, asking for healing, for more time, for mercy. I participated because it made her feel better, because I could see how desperately she needed to do something. But I felt the cancer growing, felt it spreading through my body like roots through soil. The pain got worse. The coughing fits more frequent. The exhaustion more profound. By early December, I could barely walk to the woodpile without having to stop and rest. Emily had to take over most of the physical chores, something that would have been impossible just weeks ago, but she adapted with remarkable speed. She learned to split wood, to maintain the generator, to manage all the small tasks that kept the cabin functional. And through it all, I watched her grow. Not physically, she remained trapped in her 23-year-old body, but in other ways. She was finding her strength, her purpose. The trauma of her return was still there, still weighing on her, but she was learning to carry it, to function despite it. One night in mid-December, after I'd had a particularly bad day, Emily came into my room and sat on the edge of the bed. "I saw it today," she said quietly. "The Wendigo. It was watching the cabin from the tree line." My heart skipped. Did it come closer? No. Just stood there for maybe 10 minutes, then left. But Johnny, I felt something from it. The same feeling I had in that place, that connection. And I understood something. It can't help you. Whatever power it has, whatever it did to keep me, it can't do that for you. Your cancer is natural, human. It belongs to the normal flow of life and death, and the Wendigo can't, or won't, interfere with that. I'd known that, really. But hearing her say it made it real in a way it hadn't been before. "I'm going to die," I said. Not a question. "Yes," she said, tears streaming down her face. "You are. And I hate it, and it's not fair, but it's true." We held each other in the darkness, and I felt something like relief. The pretending was over. The false hope was gone. Now we could focus on what mattered. The time we had left, however much or little that might be. "I'm scared," I admitted. "Not of dying exactly, but of leaving you alone. You just got back. You've already lost everyone else. And now you're going to lose me too." "I'll survive," Emily said. "I survived 21 years outside of time. I can survive this. But I need you to do something for me." "Anything. Tell me everything. Not about the Wendigo. I know about that now. But about you. Your life, your choices, your regrets. I've missed 2 decades of knowing you, and I want to catch up. I want to know who my brother became while I was gone." So I told her. Over the following days and weeks, as December gave way to January and the deep cold settled in, I told her everything. About the relationships I'd had and lost. The friends who'd drifted away. The career I'd abandoned. The small joys and large regrets that had filled my years. The nights I'd thought about leaving the forest and the mornings I'd decided to stay. The slow, gradual way I'd let the world forget about me, until I was just another hermit in the woods, another eccentric recluse. Emily listened to all of it, and she didn't judge. Just accepted who I'd become, the choices I'd made, the life I'd built in her absence. And in return, she told me about her dreams, the ones she'd had before she disappeared, and the new ones forming now. Dreams of understanding what had happened to her, of maybe finding others who'd had similar experiences, of carrying the knowledge she'd gained in that impossible place out into the world somehow. We were finding our way to each other again, brother and sister, across the gulf of time and trauma and impossible circumstance. And in those January days, with snow piled high and the wind howling through the pines, I felt something I hadn't felt in 21 years. Peace. By late January, I could no longer pretend I wasn't dying. The cancer had metastasized to my liver, my brain. Dr. Patterson had called me back for scans and delivered the news with professional gentleness, but her eyes held the truth. Weeks now, not months. She offered hospice care, hospital admission, pain management protocols that would keep me comfortable until the end. I declined all of it. I wanted to die here, in this cabin, surrounded by the forest that had defined the last 2 decades of my life. Emily agreed, though I could see the fear in her eyes. She'd just gotten me back, and now she had to watch me slip away. We set up the bedroom for what it would become, a dying room. Emily brought in extra blankets, positioned the bed so I could see out the window into the forest. She got the stronger pain medications, learned how to manage symptoms, how to recognize the signs of distress. She was remarkably good at it, remarkably calm, and I wondered if the 21 years outside of time had somehow prepared her for this, taught her acceptance in ways the rest of us never learned. The pain was constant now, a living thing that pressed against every moment. The medication helped, but it also made me fuzzy, made time feel strange and elastic. Days blurred together. I'd wake up thinking it was morning when it was actually evening, or think hours had passed when it had only been minutes. But through the haze, I was aware of Emily always there, reading to me from books I'd loved, telling me stories about the forest outside, about the wildlife she was seeing, about the way the snow caught the morning light, keeping me tethered to the world even as I felt myself slipping away from it. One afternoon, or maybe it was morning, I couldn't tell anymore, I woke to find her sitting by the window, staring out into the trees. There was something in her posture, something tense and alert, that cut through the medication fog. "What is it?" I asked, my voice raspy. She turned to me, and her face held wonder and fear in equal measure. "It's here," she whispered. "The Wendigo. It's been standing at the edge of the property for the last hour, just watching the cabin." I struggled to sit up, and Emily came to help me, propping pillows behind my back. Through the window I could see it. That tall, impossible figure standing among the pines, darker than the shadows around it, utterly still, watching us the way it had watched me for 18 years. "It's come to see you," Emily said quietly. "To witness this. The ending." "Help me outside," I said. "Johnny, you can't. You're too weak and it's below zero out there. Please." I looked at her. "I need to see it. One last time. I need to say goodbye." She understood, helped me into my heavy coat, wrapped blankets around me, supported my weight as we made our way slowly to the porch. The cold air hit me like a physical blow, stealing my breath, but I didn't care. I was standing in the doorway of my cabin, looking out at the Wendigo that had shaped my entire adult life, and I needed this moment. The creature moved closer, its strange gait fluid even in the deep snow. Stopped maybe 20 feet from the porch, the closest it had been since that night it brought Emily back. We looked at each other across the distance, and I felt that presence in my mind again. Stronger now, clearer than it had ever been. Maybe because I was so close to death, maybe because the barriers between this world and wherever I was going were growing thin. I felt its thoughts like waves washing over me. Recognition. Respect. Something that might have been gratitude or might have been farewell. Hard to translate emotions felt by something so fundamentally other than human. "Thank you," I said out loud, my voice weak but clear. "For bringing her back. For giving me time to say goodbye. For watching over both of us all these years." The Wendigo tilted its head, and I felt its response. Not words, but understanding. It had done what it could. Had kept its part of whatever unspoken agreement we'd forged. Had protected Emily, returned her when the time was right, watched over me as I'd watched over it. Now we were even. Now we could both let go. "Will you take care of her?" I asked, gesturing to Emily beside me. "After I'm gone. Will you watch over her the way you watched over me?" The creature's eyes shifted to Emily, and I felt something pass between them. That same connection she described, that bond formed in the space outside of time where she'd spent 21 years. She stepped forward, leaving the porch, walking closer to the Wendigo than I'd ever dared. Stopped maybe 10 feet away, looking up at its impossible height. "I'm not afraid of you anymore," she said. "I don't understand what you are or why you took me or why you brought me back. But I'm grateful. You gave me back to my brother when he needed me most. That's a gift I can't repay." The Wendigo lowered itself, bending at those strange angles, until it was closer to Emily's height. It reached out one elongated hand, held it there, an offering, an invitation. Emily looked back at me, questioning, and I nodded. Whatever happened next was between them. My part in this was almost over. She reached out and touched its hand. Just a brief contact, her human fingers against its bark-like skin. And I saw her face change, saw her eyes go wide with some understanding or vision or transfer of knowledge that I couldn't share. They stayed like that for maybe 30 seconds, connected, and I felt the weight of it, the significance of this moment, this passing of something from the ancient to the young. Then the Wendigo straightened, stepped back, looked at me one last time, and I felt its farewell like a physical thing. Our time together was complete. Our bond fulfilled. What happened next was beyond either of our control. It turned and walked back into the forest, that fluid movement carrying it between the trees and out of sight. I watched until I couldn't see it anymore, until it was just another shadow among shadows, and I knew I'd never see it again. Emily came back to the porch, helped me inside. Her face was strange, distant, like she was processing something too big to put into words. "What did you see?" I asked. "When you touched it." She was quiet for a long time. "Everything," she finally said. "Its whole life, or as much of it as I could comprehend. It's old, Johnny. Older than the forests. Older than the tribes who told stories about it. One of the last of its kind, and it's been alone for longer than we can imagine. It took me because it was lonely. Because I was the first human in centuries who saw it not as a monster but as something to understand. And it kept me because for those 21 years, it wasn't alone anymore." Tears were streaming down her face. "And it brought me back because you were dying, yes, but also because it knew you'd understand. You'd been protecting it, keeping it secret, guarding its existence. You were the only human it trusted. And it wanted me to know that. To understand what you'd given up to keep it safe." I felt something break loose in my chest, and it wasn't the cancer. It was something else, something that had been locked away for 21 years. Grief and guilt and relief all mixed together. "It showed me something else," Emily continued. "A request, or maybe a gift. When you die, when you pass from this world, it wants to take you. The way it took me. Not to that place outside of time, but somewhere else. Somewhere peaceful. So you don't have to face it alone. So your death can be witnessed by something that understands what you gave, what you sacrificed." I tried to process that. The Wendigo offering to be present at my death. To guide me in whatever way it could into whatever came next. It was terrifying and beautiful and impossible, and completely fitting for the strange relationship we'd built over 18 years. "I accept," I whispered. "Tell it I accept." Emily looked toward the window, toward the forest where the Wendigo had disappeared. "I think it already knows." The days that followed were both the hardest and the most precious of my life. The cancer was consuming me, breaking down my body piece by piece. But my mind, fogged as it was by pain and medication, held on to what mattered. Emily's presence. The sound of wind in the pines. The quality of light through the window. The sense that I was being watched over by something ancient and strange and unexpectedly compassionate. Emily never left my side. She read to me when I was lucid enough to follow. Held my hand through the bad episodes. Changed my sheets and cleaned me when I could no longer do it myself, with a tenderness that made me weep. She'd learned to be a caretaker in a matter of weeks, learned to witness suffering without flinching, learned to be present for dying in a way most people never master. "I'm proud of you," I told her one night, when the pain was particularly bad and we were both too tired to pretend. "You've been through something impossible, and you're still here. Still fighting. Still caring. That takes a strength I don't think I've ever had." "You had it," she said. "You stayed here for 18 years waiting for me. Protecting something you didn't understand because you believed it was right. That's strength, Johnny. That's the kind of strength most people never find." "I'm scared," I admitted. "I thought I'd made peace with it, but now that it's close, I'm scared." "I know. But you won't be alone. I'll be here. And I think it will be here too. The Wendigo. I can feel it out there waiting. When the time comes, it'll be here." 2 nights later, my breathing changed. Got shallow and labored, each breath a battle. Emily recognized the signs. She'd been reading about the dying process, preparing herself. She climbed into bed beside me, held me the way our mother used to hold us when we were small and frightened. "It's okay," she whispered. "You can let go. I'll be okay. You don't have to hold on for me anymore." I wanted to tell her so many things. Wanted to apologize for the choices I'd made, for the years she'd lost, for leaving her alone in a world she barely recognized. But the words wouldn't come. Just her name, whispered over and over. "Emily. Emily. Emily." "I'm here," she said. "I'm right here. And I'll carry your story. I'll remember everything. You won't be forgotten, Johnny. I promise you that." The room was growing darker, or maybe that was just my vision failing. But in that darkness, I saw something move. Felt that presence again, stronger than ever. The Wendigo coming into the cabin, approaching the bed with that strange fluid grace. Emily saw it too. I felt her stiffen beside me, felt her fear spike and then settle. "It's okay," she said, and I didn't know if she was talking to me or herself or the creature standing over us. "It's okay. We're ready." The Wendigo reached down with one long hand, and I felt it touch my forehead. The sensation was cold, but not painfully so. Like stepping into a winter stream. Like the forest itself reaching out to claim me. And with that touch came images, feelings, understanding. I saw the forest as the Wendigo saw it. Vast and interconnected, a living system spanning centuries. Saw myself as a small bright point in that system, a human who had chosen to protect rather than destroy, to witness rather than exploit. Saw Emily, preserved and returned, a bridge between human understanding and something older. Saw the choice I'd made 18 years ago to stay, to watch, to keep the secret, as a thread woven into something much larger than my individual life. And I understood, finally, why it had taken Emily. Not out of malevolence or hunger or random chance, but because it had recognized something in her. The same thing it had recognized in me when it decided to trust me with its presence all those years. A capacity to see beyond the surface, to accept the impossible, to honor the mystery rather than try to destroy it. We were chosen, both of us. For this moment, this connection, this strange transfer of understanding from something ancient to something young and human and fleeting. The pain was fading now. My body going quiet. Emily was crying, holding me tighter, but I felt peaceful. Ready. The Wendigo's hand on my forehead, Emily's arms around me, and the darkness coming in like a gentle tide. I had spent 21 years carrying a secret, living in the shadow of impossible events, protecting something the world didn't believe in. And now, at the end, I understood it had all been leading to this, a death witnessed by love and mystery both, a passing that was both ending and continuation. My last thought was of the forest, deep and dark and ancient, and something in those depths watching over my sister, keeping her safe, honoring the bond we'd forged across the impossible gulf between human and other. Then the darkness took me, and I let it, and there was peace. I didn't expect to wake up, didn't expect anything after that final darkness, that gentle fading of my brother's breath against my shoulder. But reality has a way of insisting on itself, and the morning after John died, I woke to cold sunlight streaming through the cabin window and the knowledge that I was completely alone. The Wendigo had left sometime during the night. I don't know when exactly. I'd fallen asleep beside John's body, exhausted from grief and the long weeks of caregiving, and when I woke it was just me and him. His body already growing cold. His face peaceful in a way it hadn't been for weeks. The pain finally gone. The struggle over. I sat with him for hours, not ready to let go yet, not ready to start the impossible process of explaining his death to authorities, of burying my brother in the forest he'd loved and protected. Eventually, though, practical concerns forced me to move. I called Dr. Patterson, who understood without needing much explanation. She arranged for the coroner to come out, for the death certificate, for all the mundane paperwork that accompanies dying. They took John's body 3 days later. I buried him in a small cemetery in Marquette, next to our parents. Put all 3 of them together finally, reunited in death if not in life. Standing at his grave, watching them lower his casket into the frozen ground, I felt the weight of everything I'd lost. 21 years. My whole family. The life I was supposed to have lived. But I also felt something else. A strange sense of purpose, of continuation. John had spent 18 years keeping a secret, protecting something the world didn't believe in. Now that duty had passed to me. I was the keeper of the impossible now, the witness to things that shouldn't exist. I stayed at the cabin through the rest of winter, learned to live alone in the deep woods, to manage the generator and chop the wood and survive the isolation. It was hard at first, terrifying actually to be by myself in a place so remote, with only the memory of the Wendigo for company. But gradually, I found a rhythm, found strength I didn't know I had. And I wasn't completely alone. The Wendigo returned in March, when the snow was beginning to melt and the first hints of spring were touching the forest. I saw it standing at the tree line one morning, watching the cabin the way it had watched John all those years. We looked at each other across the distance, and I felt that connection again. The understanding that had passed between us when John was dying. The bond that now tied me to something ancient and strange. It came closer than it ever had with John, stopping maybe 10 feet from the porch. Close enough that I could see the texture of its skin, the intelligence in its dark eyes. Close enough that when it made that low sound, I could feel it resonating in my chest. I walked toward it, unafraid. Put my hand out the way I had that day in January, and it reached out to touch me. And in that moment of contact I felt it all again. The vast age of the thing before me. The loneliness of being one of the last. The gratitude for protection given. The grief for John, genuine and deep. And I felt something else. A question. What now? What would I do with the knowledge I carried, the understanding I'd gained? Would I keep the secret as John had? Or would I try to share it to make the world understand that there were things older and stranger than we imagined, living in the margins we'd forgotten to map? I thought about it for a long time. Stood there with the Wendigo's hand against mine, feeling that connection, and considered my options. I could stay here, become another hermit in the woods, dedicate my life to protecting this ancient being the way John had. That would be the safe choice. The choice that honored his sacrifice. Or I could leave. Go back to the world, try to finish my education, build some version of the life I'd planned before 2003. Try to find others who'd had impossible experiences, who'd encountered things they couldn't explain. Build a community of witnesses, of people who understood that reality was stranger and more mysterious than the textbooks taught. Both paths had merit. Both felt right in different ways. The Wendigo watched me, patient, as I worked through it. And finally, I understood. I didn't have to choose just one path. I could do both. I could be the bridge between the deep forest and the human world. Could protect its secret while also searching for others who'd brushed against the impossible. Could honor John's sacrifice while also living my own life. I pulled my hand back, smiled at the creature before me. I'll come back, I said. This is my home now as much as it was John's. But I need to go out into the world too. Need to figure out who I am, what I'm supposed to do with this knowledge. Can you understand that? The Wendigo tilted its head, and I felt its acceptance. Yes. Go. Live. Learn. But return. This forest is yours now. These secrets are yours to keep or share as you see fit. But return. I will, I promised. Every year when winter comes. I'll come back here to this cabin, to these woods. I'll keep watch. I'll make sure you're protected. And if anything threatens you, threatens this place, I'll fight it. That's my oath, the way it was John's. The Wendigo made that sound again, and I felt something like blessing. Like approval. Then it turned and walked back into the forest, and I stood on the porch watching it go, feeling both sadness and hope. I left the cabin in April, once the roads were clear. Drove to Marquette, then to Ann Arbor, back to the university where I'd been a graduate student 21 years ago. Explained my impossible story to administrators who looked at me like I was insane, showed them the documents Dr. Patterson had helped me prepare, proved my identity through DNA testing and old records and sheer persistence. It took months to sort out. To get my death certificate revoked, to reclaim my identity, to navigate a world that had moved on without me. But I'm stubborn, always have been, and eventually I found my way. Found professors who remembered me, who were willing to vouch for me. Found a counselor who specialized in trauma and helped me process what I'd been through. Found, slowly, a path forward. I'm back in school now. Started over with my doctorate, focusing on forest ecology and conservation. The research I'm doing examines how isolated ecosystems survive in a changing world, how ancient things persist in the margins. My advisors think I'm studying endangered species and old-growth preservation. They don't know I'm also studying something much stranger. I've started writing, too, documenting what happened to John and me, to the Wendigo we encountered. Not for publication, not yet, maybe not ever, but for the record. So that if something happens to me, if I disappear into the woods the way I once did, someone will know the truth. Someone will understand that the impossible is real, and that it deserves protection rather than destruction. And I've been searching, looking for others who've had experiences like mine, who've encountered things that shouldn't exist, who've been taken to places outside of normal space and time, who've come back changed. There aren't many. These encounters are rare, and most people don't talk about them for fear of being labeled crazy. But I'm finding them, one by one. Building a network, a community of witnesses. Someday maybe we'll be ready to tell the world what we know, to present the evidence, to force a reckoning with the fact that reality is stranger and more mysterious than science currently admits. But that day isn't today. Today, I'm still learning, still gathering stories, still figuring out how to bridge the gap between the possible and impossible. Every winter, I return to the cabin. Spend December through February in the deep cold, alone with the forest and the memories. And the Wendigo comes. Not every day, not even every week, but regularly. We've developed our own relationship now, different from what it had with John, but no less significant. It shows me things. Hidden places in the forest, ancient groves, springs that never freeze. Teaches me, in its way, about the land it's been guardian of for centuries. And I show it things too. Pictures of the world beyond these woods, stories of what I'm learning. Proof that humans can be curious and protective rather than destructive. Proof that John's sacrifice meant something, that his 18 years of watching and guarding had made a difference. Last winter, on the anniversary of John's death, I stood at the edge of the property where he used to leave offerings for the Wendigo all those years ago. I'd brought venison and bread and salt, maintaining the tradition he'd started. Laid them out with care, said a prayer for my brother, for my parents, for everyone I'd lost. The Wendigo appeared from the trees, silent as always. Stood beside me, looking at the offerings, and I felt its grief mix with mine. We'd both lost something when John died. A connection, a friendship, a bond that had grown over nearly 2 decades. The forest was quieter without him. The world was darker. But we were still here. Still watching. Still keeping the secret. And that had to be enough. I miss him, I said out loud, not sure if the Wendigo understood language but knowing it understood meaning. Every day I miss him. He gave up so much for both of us. The Wendigo turned its dark eyes to me, and I felt its response. Yes. And we honor that sacrifice by living well. By protecting what he protected. By being worthy of the gift he gave us, time understanding the bridge he built between human and other. We stood together as the sun set, throwing long shadows across the snow. 2 beings who shouldn't have a relationship, who by all logic and reason should be enemies or at least indifferent to each other. But we weren't. We were something else. Guardians of the same sacred mystery, protectors of the same ancient secret. When darkness fell, the Wendigo walked away into the forest. But before it disappeared, it did something it had never done before. It looked back and raised one long hand in what could only be described as a wave. A gesture of farewell, or maybe of recognition. Of understanding that our paths would continue to cross, that the bond forged in impossible circumstances would endure. I raised my hand in return, smiling through tears. Until next time, I whispered. The Wendigo vanished into the shadows, and I was alone again. But not really alone. Never really alone, not anymore. I had the forest around me, full of secrets and stories. I had my work, my research, my search for others who'd touched the impossible. I had the cabin, John's legacy, a place to return to when the world became too much. And I had the knowledge that somewhere in these deep woods, something ancient was watching over me, keeping its own vigil, maintaining its own vigil, honoring the pact John had made 18 years ago when he chose to protect rather than expose, to witness rather than destroy. My sister disappeared in 2003. 21 years later, the Wendigo brought her back. But that's not really the end of the story. It's just the beginning. The beginning of understanding that the world is wider and stranger than we admit. That there are things older than human memory living in the places we've forgotten. That encounters with the impossible can lead not to destruction but to connection. Not to fear but to reverence. John spent 18 years keeping this secret. Now it's my turn. My burden and my honor. And I'll carry it for as long as I live, This knowledge that reality has thin places where the ancient and the modern meet, where creatures that shouldn't exist watch over forests we think we understand, where love and duty and sacrifice can build bridges across the impossible gulf between human and other. This is my confession. This is my testimony. This is the truth about my brother John Mercer, who died protecting something the world doesn't believe in, and about the Wendigo that changed both our lives forever. And every winter, when the snow falls deep and the forest grows quiet, I'll return to that cabin in the Michigan woods. I'll watch for shadows moving between the pines. I'll leave offerings at the tree line. I'll keep the vigil John started, maintaining the bond he forged, honoring the sacrifice he made. Because some secrets are worth keeping. Some mysteries are worth protecting. And some relationships, impossible as they may be, are worth nurturing across the vast distance between what we know and what we can never fully understand. The Wendigo is out there still, ancient and solitary, watching over its forest. And I'm here, young in body but old in understanding, watching over it in return. That's the bargain we've made. That's the covenant we keep. And that's the story I'm finally ready to tell.